Thank you very much, Anne, and good evening, everybody. Somebody tweeted last night that a man should not be allowed to make a PowerPoint presentation at 10 o'clock. I wonder, does that apply to a woman at 9:15? If it does, I apologise in advance, and I'll be as brief as I possibly can be. There is a longer version of what I'm about to say, which will be available on the Revenue website probably tomorrow. And I don't promise to keep to it literally, just to share some thoughts with you. I suppose my proposition tonight is a fairly simple one. In order to be a state, one of the badges of statehood is to be able to raise your own revenues and to protect your borders. And in revenue, that's what we do. We're the Tax and Customs Administration. In a republic, you govern by consent, and I believe we also tax by consent. I believe the quality of that consent is significantly influenced by the integrity and fairness of the tax administration, of the work we do in revenue. And then I think that strong tax compliance, which comes from, I believe, fair administration, is a sign of identification with the state. So that's essentially my proposition in a nutshell. The title I chose for the paper is Revenue's Mission to assist the community by fairly and efficiently collecting taxes and duties and so on. The word "and" between fairly and efficiently is most important. Without that, we would be entirely inadequate. I want to say a word briefly about fairness in the tax system. The call that it's not fair is something that comes up regularly in our work. And I could blind you for an hour with statistics about the tax as a share of GDP and the progressivity of the tax system and so on and so forth, and VAT is more fair than some other taxes. Some people believe flat tax is the only tax that's fair, other people think it's crazy. I suppose the point I want to make is the fairness in the system depends on where you're standing. It is often in the eye of the beholder. The mix of who to tax and what to tax is a matter of political choice, which those choices take account of economic policy, social policy, regional policy quite often, agricultural policy, all sorts of policies down the years, and they're never settled. The taxation mix is always evolving. But from our point of view, the notion that I came across years ago when I worked in industrial relations of felt fairness, I think is an important one in taxation. We must administer fairly, but if the public believe that the entire taxation package doesn't feel fair, it makes our job harder. And as I said earlier, I believe the public has to have confidence in the integrity and fairness of the agency for us to do our jobs. I want to draw your attention to a letter I came across about 15 years ago. And the point of this letter is that as well as choices that the new state can make about the forms of taxation, it has choices about the forms of administration. This letter was written by the Minister for Finance at 3:30 in the afternoon on the 21st of August 1922. Historians among you will know the significance of that date. And in that letter, he was in West Cork and he was worried about the revenues. He wrote back to W.T. Cosgrove and said, "We need to find 3 independent men to look after the revenues." I'll forgive him the political incorrectness. And he said that good administration was needed everywhere. The following day, he was shot. And the 21st of February the following year, the 21st of February the following year, the Board of the Revenue Commissioners was formed. And it was formed with 3 characteristics which I think are important. And harking back to something Eddie Malloy said last night, it was formed before the Ministers and Secretaries Act. It was formed before almost any other institution. There were 3 things about it. We're independent. We're not run by a politician. We're appointed by the Chairman of the Executive Council, in other words, or the President of the Executive Council, in other words, the Taoiseach, and can only be removed by the Executive Council, who are accountable to the Minister for Finance. So separating the appointment and removal process from the accountability process, giving us an independence which was repeated in the Oireachtas by every minister since the foundation of the state, and in 2011 was put on a statutory basis for the first time, was a significant I believe, foundation stone in the fairness of tax administration. What does fair administration mean? It means trying to ensure that people in the same circumstances are treated the same. But it also means that at individual level they're treated reasonably, proportionately. It means that we have to fix things that go wrong. We have to be transparent and accountable. We do this in very many ways in revenue. Some of them are listed in the paper. I won't read them out. One that is the most important is we have an explicit statement of a presumption of honesty. We presume, when you make a tax return, that you're being honest. And we will treat you in that way unless we have evidence to believe to the contrary. And that's a hugely important statement in terms of setting the culture within the organisation. We have structures in place as well which are important to make sure that we don't vicariously or in an arbitrary way use the powers that we have. It also means being very careful when we use our discretion. We always have more to do, and we need strong oversight of us. I think we get that in lots of ways. Controller and Auditor General, PAC, I could go on, lots of Oireachtas committees. I'm personally accountable to the Minister, and so on. We also need consultative structures for feedback, so that we know whether people are feeling that what we're doing is fair. We have good structures with lots of groups, including representatives of senior citizens. Engaging with the general public is a challenge for us, because it's hard to find the representative body for the general public in our business. So we meet practitioners, but I'm not sure. And we have PAYE focus groups in some parts of the country. We have hidden economy groups in other parts. But finding the feedback from the general public is a challenge for us, but is something we regard as really, really important. I want to pose a question about justice, equality and fairness that's in our theme. Can you have all three in the absolute sense? Sometimes are they complementary or are they contradictory? Can we be fair to the individual and at the same time be fair to the community? Can I just maybe give you two examples in my business? The area where I get a lot of suggestions that we're behaving unfairly is in relation to revenue debt. Business A makes widgets. They collect VAT, they deduct PRSI and PAYE from their workers' wages. They don't send it in. Instead, they invest it in the business and they create more jobs. Business B in the next town is making widgets. He's paying his taxes. He's finding it really hard to compete. Where's the fairness? We move on business A eventually after giving him several chances to pay his debts. The business closes and the jobs are lost, and I get howls of unfairness. And in the meantime, business B is actually finally getting breathing space. So we take that fairness at the level of level playing field for businesses as a very serious measure of fairness for us. The other one I want to refer to, because no speech I make this year could possibly be complete without a reference to local property tax. If you had arrived from Mars 3 months ago, you would have thought that the administration of property tax was being done by Vlad the Impaler. And I guess one of the things that struck me in the middle of it were a couple of things. One was this tax was entirely legitimate in the democratic sense. The law was passed by the Oireachtas and it was given to us to administer. Certainly it hit the equity button because everybody, the scope was really wide and everybody was in scope. Every single error, and there were many, and we know, were seized upon as failures. And in the meantime, the silent majority were paying the tax in their droves. So much so that 46% paid 2 months before they had to. I don't think that that tax can have felt that unfair if we got such a significant compliance rate. So why? Well, I believe it's because most people want to do the right thing. A few years ago, we did a survey of SMEs, which we're repeating this year, and we'll have new data soon. And 77% of them said, rated as high or very high, that they complied because it was the law. And 86% said it was high or very high because it was the right thing to do. Now, that wasn't just SMEs maybe at a time when They weren't under such pressure that we're saying that, because that was 2008. And that was the first really year where we started to feel, it was the first year of the emergency budget. We're also finding this evidence every year. We get a minimum tax compliance rate across the taxes of 80%. For the largest cases that pay the most money, we get up to 95% on time. And local property tax is at 89% on time. Those are not sort of signs of a tax system in which people don't have public confidence. But I think it's important, and the next point I want to make is about legitimate power and trust and public confidence. I don't think legitimate power comes only from the law. The law is useful. But if the population at large do not want to engage with the tax system, the law on its own would certainly not be enough. And then, when we achieve a high compliance rate, that high compliance rate begs determined action from us in order to be fair to the people that have complied. So that's back to my fairness to the community point. To be fair, so we have a virtuous circle. If we can get high compliance because people have confidence in the way we do our business, then that high compliance compels us to have strong interventions for those who do not comply. And that in turn shores up the voluntary compliance the next time round. I think public confidence is fragile. We've had our moments. In the middle of the 80s, a famous tax commission report said the administration of tax had broken down, and there was very low public confidence. We've had our moments. In fact, we're the only one that had a moment with the proper parliamentary inquiry and the Dirt inquiry. So we know what it feels like for public confidence in tax administration to be dented and damaged. It has to be earned, it has to be worked at, and fairness has to be resourced. Sometimes it's easier not to be fair, just to go for it. So fairness requires resources, it requires working at, and a very conscious effort on the part of all public administrators. It's easily damaged, but our entitlement to tax comes from the people through the Oireachtas. And every year, the Oireachtas confirms that confidence by placing the revenues of the state under the care and management of the Revenue Commissioners. That being the case, I sometimes find some political comment a bit bewildering, such as somebody who recently said that unelected revenue were strangling the masses. We're not supposed to be elected. The elected members of Parliament, Government and Oireachtas give us our authority, and they place the revenues under our care and management. Finally, where would the state be if revenue didn't work? Looking towards 2016, where would the state be if 94% of the revenues were not collected efficiently and fairly? You only have to look at some international comparisons as to what happens when the administration of tax breaks down and public confidence breaks down. That is not to say that we don't have tax evasion. We most certainly do. And it is not to say that we don't have abusive tax planning. We most certainly do. And it's our job to be very firm and very focused on those issues. But one thing I have certainly noticed, and I think it's interesting to reflect on the changes over the last 30 years, is it's not acceptable anymore. 30 years ago, 20 years ago, it wasn't unusual for people to boast about their offshore account, or their bogus account indeed. It's not acceptable anymore. And that is right. And that is certainly a sign, I think, of maturing in our republic, of maturing in the identification with the state, of a maturing in our understanding that taxation is an essential piece of our republic, and paying it is about serving the community. If something positive has come out of the last few difficult years, Maybe it's because there is a realisation now that the country needs revenues, and it needs revenues to run services, and that those revenues have to come in sometimes the hard way, maybe rather than the easy way. And if I could just leave you with a final comment from the Minister for Finance's letter in 1922, which may well be the answer. He said, "The people are splendid." And perhaps that's exactly what has happened to us as this republic has grown up. Thank you very much.